It was 5:48 a.m. on a crisp Thursday in late September. The quiet of the early morning, that particular grayness before the sun fully wakes up, wrapped around Elliot Crane as he walked down the gravel path to the control house. With the weight of 14 months of unspoken frustration and careful planning, he unlocked the door and stepped inside, feeling the cold steel of the gate mechanism under his hand. It was time. He had his coffee in one hand and the keys to the kingdom in the other. 19 acres of private water that he had managed since 2004. He had lived through spring floods, summer droughts, and fall preparations, knowing every twist and turn of the hydraulic system like an old friend. This was something different. This was the culmination of months of silence, documentation, and a quiet resolve to let the situation play out on his terms. It was time to open the gates. With a calm hand, he turned the release valve. There was no dramatic rush of water, no flood of emotion, just the steady, purposeful sound of the spillway opening, the low groan of metal against pressure, the lake starting to drop as it always did when the control gates were opened. He set his coffee down on the shelf, took a moment to listen to the water, and then turned to leave. The next few hours would be filled with nothing but the subtle, relentless drop of the water level. As Elliot walked back to his porch, the lake began its quiet retreat. By 8 a.m., it was 3 inches lower. By noon, it had dropped 11 inches. Harrow Lake was already a different place, and the 139 vacation cabins along its shore, built on Elliot's land without his permission, began to show the first signs of the lake's wrath. It wasn't an accident. This was planned. Every movement of the water, every inch of drop was documented, and it was all a calculated decision made over the span of a year. Elliot didn't call anyone. He didn't send letters. He didn't warn the HOA, the Ridgerest Lake community, or their board president, Douglas Fair. Instead, he simply watched. Watched as the lake did what it always did when the pressure was lifted, moved forward, quietly, steadily, without hesitation. By noon, 3 of the lower cabin lots were already showing signs of water moving toward their foundation edges. And though Elliot's phone rang 7 times that day, he didn't answer any of them. He didn't need to. The legal battle had already been fought, the evidence already collected, and the silence was his weapon. Over the last 14 months, every letter, every foundation pour, every dock installation had been photographed, documented, and added to a growing binder, an ironclad case against the HOA. The HOA had decided to test the boundaries of an easement agreement from 1987, assuming it had the right to develop on Elliot's land without his consent. They were wrong, but Elliot didn't need to tell them that. He simply waited. Days passed. The construction continued. The cabins went up, and Elliot documented every step. He never spoke a word. He just watched his camera always in hand, his mind always calculating. By the time the first cabin owners arrived in May, Elliot had a stack of documents that would bring down the entire development surveyor's reports, water rights assessments, photographs, and legal analysis, all prepared quietly by his attorney, Margaret Voss. In the meantime, the cabin owners, eager to check on their new vacation homes, began to notice something strange. The lake wasn't behaving as it should. The docks were sitting lower, the shoreline was changing, and slowly they began to ask questions. They called Elliot, but he didn't answer. He couldn't give them the answers they were looking for, not yet. They would have to wait. In August, after 93 units were complete, Douglas sent his second letter, but the tone had shifted. It wasn't the same confident language from the beginning. It was a bit more defensive, a bit more urgent. The HOA, now ahead of schedule, was confident that they could press on. But Elliot wasn't done. His plan was never about stopping construction. It was always about letting the weight of the law bring it to a halt. Margaret had done everything in silence. When the last cabin was completed, the legal package was ready. It was a 41-page complaint, an ironclad case, every violation meticulously documented. The trespass survey showed 61 cabins sitting on land Elliot owned. The hydrological report predicted the flooding that would occur as a result of the development. The water rights assessment confirmed that Elliot had the legal authority to manage the lake at any level, and the HOA had no right to challenge it. And then at 9 a.m., just as planned, Margaret filed the complaint in court. The process server arrived at the HOA's office, and the storm began. The cabin owners, who had spent months eagerly awaiting their vacation homes, suddenly found themselves in the middle of a legal nightmare. Their properties, it seemed, were built on land they had no right to develop. Douglas's calls went unanswered. The board was blindsided. The cabin owners, one by one, began to realize that the property they had purchased, the vacation homes they had bought in good faith, were built on land that wasn't legally theirs. The community began to fracture. People started asking questions. What was going on? Who was Elliot Crane, and why had no one mentioned him before? By the evening, Douglas had called an emergency meeting, but the damage was done. Robert, a cabin owner, stood up and read paragraph 14 of the complaint aloud. It was the beginning of the end. The community, once united in excitement for their new homes, was now divided. Some were frightened, others were furious, and a few were already consulting lawyers ready to take action against the HOA for their role in the misrepresentation. Over the next few weeks, the HOA's legal team scrambled to figure out how to respond, but it was too late. The legal foundations had already been set. The trespass had been documented, the water rights had been established, and the 139 vacation homes built on land that didn't belong to the HOA had become a ticking time bomb. Douglas resigned in disgrace. The HOA had to negotiate a settlement with Elliot, one that would cost them millions. But Elliot never raised his voice. He never sent an angry letter. He simply waited. And when the settlement was signed, the lake, the land, and the truth were finally his. The water had done what it always did, quietly, steadily, without hesitation. Moral of the story: sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon. In a world where people often rush to assert their rights, sometimes the best course of action is to let things unfold on their own. The truth will always find its way to the surface, and when it does, justice will be served. Call to action. What do you think about this story? Is silence the best strategy, or should Elliot have acted sooner? Share your thoughts on justice power and the consequences of unchecked authority in the comments below.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.